Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to the Operation Freedom Platform, davejanda.com, and our ongoing Insider Insight series. I'm honored to have back with me someone who is a very dear friend and someone who is quite the pioneer and trailblazer. I have gotten a tremendous amount of information and contacts from people saying, look, and I can't say particular names here, obviously, because the censors will take us down. But as we all know, we have been through a lot over the past year and a half. And many people, as they're getting back into the workplace, have been disenchanted with their employer that they have previously been employed by. And now that same employer is putting some restrictions on their employee. For example, you're not allowed back in the office unless we administer to you. Many folks that I have been contacted by have significant problems with this, as I do. Now, these same people say, I have always had this dream of starting and running a business, but I don't know where to start. Which is why I have with us someone who's a very dear friend, Gary Steuart from Steuart, Steuart, SteuartLabs.com. He started his own company back in the early 1980s. A little background on Gary. He is the CEO of Steuart Laboratories, which is a FDA-licensed over-the-counter drug manufacturer of topical human and animal health products. Gary grew up on a farm in the country. And in fact, he ended up getting a degree in agriculture from the University of Minnesota. And much of his early working life was spent at the business end, if you will, of a dairy cow. But what he did is he took his talents and his dreams, took them from the farm, and started a business back in, I believe it was May of 1982. And it started out in his apartment kitchen. And that kitchen has grown into a company which is the leader in the field of national and nutritional health products, Steuart Labs. And many people say, well, I don't know how to start and how to get going here. And if this company that I'm thinking about starting has to deal with the federal government or state government, I'm not sure how to do that. And I can't think of a better person to bring forward than Gary Steuart. Gary, welcome back to the Operation Freedom Platform. You're an inspiration to many. We did an interview several years ago that caught fire and really got people looking at starting a business. Let's educate our listeners, Gary, on what you did, because there's some secret sauce, if you will, in more than one way. Secret sauce that you've implemented to have a very profound impact in making your business very successful.
Well, first of all, I back in the early 80s, I had a friend who was an inventor. The guy was a genius, but he couldn't balance a checkbook. He just didn't have business sense. So he could add and subtract, but he couldn't handle the reconciling checks. So I took his formula and it utilized the comfrey plant, which is a plant that has recognized healing properties. Mm-hmm. So I took that formula and started making it, as you said, in an apartment kitchen. I paid him royalties. We started with an udder ointment for dairy cows, and that was the beginning. And I think if somebody wants to start a business, you have to start. Now, it helps a great deal if you've got some capital, which I didn't have. Plus, I had a lot of ignorance, which is a bad combination. But we did start, and we did manage to survive. But early in this process, I recognized that we had a compound that was extremely good on wounds. Mm. It was bactericidal, and it stimulated healing, which in the medical market is very rare. So we started with that. And, out here in the country, if something works out in the barn, it's liable to end up. We decided to, start gravitating into the medical market, which we did. We took our outer ointment and made it into a wound product. We developed a foot cream for dry feet, calluses, and cracks, which it has pretty good acceptance in the diabetic marketplace. And at one point, we developed a product for joint and muscle pain relief for horses, particularly race horses. Mm-hmm. Well, we realized right away that worked on people, and so we concentrated on the people market. That particular product is anti-inflammatory, so it works extremely well on arthritis, sore muscles from strains and sprains, and I think you found that out yourself, David.
Well, I did actually. I have fairly significant arthritis, and there are days, Gary, when I get a little too active, and you almost want to take a bath in the stuff. And I'll tell you, it works. I mean, it's very, very effective. It's very effective as reducing inflammation, and also I also found that a number of people that I've recommended that particular pain product to that have had not just not arthritis, which can be bad enough, but a recent injury, acute trauma, surgery, not obviously over the wound or anything of that nature, but it makes a remarkable difference in folks' recovery, in reducing pain, and also their requirements for pain medication. This is one of the really hidden gems of what your company does, is that you have provided a platform so that folks don't have to, because you hear this time and time again. Many people say, I got addicted to painkillers because I was having to take such great quantities, and it can even be for a short period of time, and it led to an addiction. Well, I can tell you that with what you have here, and by studying the company you did and with the product you have, the reliance on pain medication drastically diminishes, if not completely negates it.
That's correct. And as you mentioned, we don't recommend putting it on a surgical wound that's not healed because it's not an antiseptic product. Mm-hmm. But once they get closure, they can use it over the top of the incision, and they can use it around the incision. I don't know if we've ever talked about this before, but when people have abdominal surgery with the laparoscopes, they inflate the abdomen with CO2 gas, and then after the surgical procedure, they extract out the CO2. But what happens is some of that CO2 gets absorbed into the bloodstream, migrates normally to the area of the chest, shoulders, upper arms, and that can cause intense pain. I don't understand the physiology of it, but we found out that our pain product will usually relieve that pain within minutes. Another huge deal. Another thing that we've learned is over time that this relieves the pain associated with diabetic neuropathy, which is basically the breakdown of the nerve myelin sheath. We've got a congressman who I can't mention his name, obviously, but he's told us that this is the product that lets him sleep at night. We understand that even many of the prescription products for diabetic neuropathy are not very effective. So that's another use that we found with time. And we've also learned that it stimulates healing in a rather dramatic way on soft tissue, muscle, cartilage, tendons, and seems to have a positive effect on bone healing. Number of years ago, I got interested in Ukraine. I was convinced that our wound product was ideal for military use. Okay, so I approached the U.S. military, and I never got anywhere in that bureaucracy. I had a contact within the Israeli Defense Force. Again, bureaucracy stopped us. But the reason I was so convinced that this product had an ideal application in military situations was because it was economical. It was an extremely stable compound. You can put it under a bandage and leave it for up to 2 days. It was bactericidal. At the same time, it stimulated healing. And it didn't require special packaging beyond just a tight container. Military guys could put it in their knapsack and carry it right in the field with them. Well, in 2014, war broke out in eastern Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And of course, Ukraine's a poor country, and I knew they didn't have any money. I thought, maybe I can crack the military there. So I went to Ukraine, and I was able to make a connection with the volunteers that were providing a lot of the supplies to the Ukrainian military. Much of the clothing, food, medical supplies was coming from private sources. So I was able to get that product into the war zone, into the medical clinics, and I was even able to go into that war zone where I wasn't supposed to be, but I was able to visit medical clinics. Most of them were dugouts or tents, but those folks were glad to have the product. I didn't have to go through any protocol. I would hand it off to the doctors, and they started using it. But as a result of those contacts, I got to know a special ops guy who's, I guess he's sort of like our Rangers, Green Berets. But he was in a vehicle accident and had multiple fractures in his left leg. So they did what's called an external fixator, mm-hmm. which I'm sure you're very familiar with. Mm-hmm. And so after the surgery was done, I made contact with his team, and I explained to him that the pain formula would help him with the pain, but not only that, it would help the healing process. Well, as a result of using the product, which we supplied, he was back on duty in a year, and his doctor was convinced that that product shortened his recovery time in a significant way. And like I said, Ukraine's a poor country. We don't sell them anything. We've been doing this at no charge to them. And unfortunately, because the country is so corrupt, we have a difficult time getting product in there at no charge.
So here's an interesting thing. A couple of things you just said. Number one, the foundation for your success with this company is when I know you for years and hear your story. One is a product that can make a positive difference. Okay. Number two is perseverance and dedication, right? Because as you mentioned, you tried a number of avenues that didn't work, but you eventually cultivated avenues that actually did work. And the third thing is something you mentioned at the end, is that you provided your product free of charge in Ukraine. Well, the reason why I bring that up is many years ago, I had an opportunity to sit down with Henry Mancini, the composer.
Yes.
And we were talking about things, and I asked him about what he attributed his success to. And he said, it's going to sound rather strange, but it's I gave away a lot of my initial work to people, to entities. And he said those same people ended up coming back to me, and this time paying me for my compositions. And at that point, somebody came in the room and said, Mr. Mancini, there are some young composers and conductors that would like to talk to you and meet you. And he said, "Oh, sure, have him come on in." And he looked at me and he goes, remember what I just told you. Now watch the reaction I get. And these younger folks came in, and they were in their probably mid-20s. And oh, Mr. Mancini, great to meet you. He was very kind. He's very nice. He's a really good guy. And they were talking for a little bit, and he looked at them and he said, "So, what do you can? You're obviously here, and you're well aware of my work, and you obviously think I'm at least minimally successful in our industry. Oh, Mr. Mancini, you're incredibly successful. You won all these awards, blah 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 blah." He goes, "Okay, let me ask you something. What do you think was the key to my success?" "Oh, well, when you first did this, right? This particular movie, a composition, and that's what really..." And they had all kinds of answers. And he looked at me and goes, "Let me tell you what led to those things." And he said the exact same thing that he had just said to me about giving your work away initially, and that's what... And these people, these young, they looked at him like he was crazy. And they said, "You mean what? Give away your work? What? Why would we do that?" And he said, "I am telling you that every successful person I have ever dealt with and met, in our industry and outside of our industry, at some point in time, early in their career, they didn't give away the farm. But what they did is they took whatever their talent was and they channeled it into, if you will, providing free product, free service to an entity that ultimately led to their breakthrough." And these folks looked at him and said, "Well, that might have worked essentially that might have worked in the past, but it's not going to work in the future." And they ended up leaving, and he looked at me and he said, "Dave," he goes, "I have a prediction. Based on their response," he goes, "if they continue to follow through with what they said, they're never going to be successful in this industry." So, but you point that out again. You have to have a good product, a tested product, a product that makes a difference, number one. Number two, perseverance, dedication, and sacrifice. When you heard the words no from the U.S. Defense Department or the IDF or whatever, you didn't pack up and go, "Well, I guess that's it." You kept charging ahead, and even though you kept charging ahead, you had this relationship with Ukraine, which was kind of you provided a product free. So then there's this issue, Gary, with our listeners in the past when we've done these interviews. They say, how did Gary has a product that he has to deal with the feds on and the state on, but in particular the feds. How do we get our head around dealing with the feds? How did Gary do it when he started out, and then after he started out down the line and dealing with the feds and getting around? You mentioned the bureaucracy, the red tape.
Well, again, I started out with lots of ignorance, but over time we did develop a relationship with the FDA. And at one point we had an inspector he was a real detail-oriented guy, but he was a very nice guy. Uh-huh. And he, even though he wasn't supposed to, walked us through the GMP process and how we were supposed to set up the paperwork for that.
What's GMP stand for?
Good manufacturing practices.
Okay, very good.
There were consultants who would do that. Most of them are attorneys, and we just never felt like we had the capital available at that time to do it. Mm-hmm. So at any rate, we got those processes set up, and we worked with this guy. And at the level we're at, FDA doesn't really give us their approval. They come in and look at our paperwork, labels, procedures, all that. And if they don't write a complaint, you're okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the approval is the absence of a complaint, basically. But again, it was trial and error. And And I've become a believer in the idea that you have to start, begin, and find out what you don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, there were times that it was nearly disastrous. I mean, we went through financially hard times. At one point, I had a couple of warning letters from the FDA, and I was very close to being shut down. But I was able to get a meeting with the regional office in Minneapolis, showed them what we were doing, and the director said, okay, we're going to let you continue. After that meeting, I had a whole lot less trouble with the FDA.
Now, Gary, did you notice a change in 2017, if you will, after President Trump was inaugurated? Did you notice a change in dealing with the federal bureaucracy? Because many people say, oh, I didn't notice anything. Other people said, no, I did notice anything. There was less bureaucratic red tape. What was your observation?
We noticed a couple things. In 2015, I was starting to go through a process with the Federal Trade Commission. It was really a burdensome audit. The deadline for my paperwork was November 4th, 2016. Halfway into 2017, after Donald Trump was elected, they called us and said, this company's too small. We're not going to put the resources into it. So that situation just evaporated. Later in 2017, our regular FDA inspector came in and told us, and he was a guy that had helped us out, but he told us that we were no longer assigned a drug inspector. So we have not seen a federal inspector from the FDA for 4 years now. He was the last one that was in here. So I think what happened was that Donald Trump squeezed these agencies and made them start focusing on the real work. Mm-hmm. And there was, at this stage, at least still now, there seems to be a lot less harassment going on. Now, I haven't seen any change since Joe Biden's occupied the office. Mm-hmm. I have no idea whether or not that will continue. There's just a whole lot of unknowns right now. But we'll deal with it as we go.
You know, Gary, early in our time today, you mentioned about having capital to start out. That's a big problem for obviously many individuals, many groups of people trying to start a business. Did you find any, and you mentioned you had made some mistakes early, from your experience, both positive and negative, what do you suggest on the capital front for people that are starting a business and say, gee, I got a great idea, and everybody says, wow, this is a great idea, this is a great product, and about getting the financing? Did you come up with any experiences where you said, if I would have known this X number of weeks, months ago, life would be a lot easier in getting the financing?
That was a difficult one for me. I mean, at one point, it was back then, it was First National Bank in St. Paul, had an investment seminar, and one of the executives put on a forum, to teach people how to raise capital. Mm-hmm. And it was $25 to attend the forum. I didn't have the $25. But basically, how we financed this was through revenue that we generated. The one thing I learned over time was that I needed to be very conservative with my money. And even though we had more money, or we had no money when we started, mm-hmm. I became even more conservative after I got into the process. Mm-hmm. Now, at this stage, we've acquired some assets, we developed a bunch of products, we're able to get some help from the banks. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The other option people could pursue is, taking in private investors. I did that on a very limited basis, and I was just never very good at convincing people to take a risk on me. And unfortunately, many times the people that are willing to finance you are your friends. And I didn't want my friends losing money. And we went through a couple of reorganizations where we were just practically cleaned out, but were able to keep operating. At one point, we went through a reorganization on our real estate loans. But we worked out of it, and I got to a point where I just became very careful with the capital that I had.
And Gary, when you look at your products, one of the other things that that some businesses fall into is that they diversify so much. Well, if we have 5 products, let's diversify into 50. And they do it so quickly that their business actually becomes strung out. So when you look at your product lines, you mentioned you have the pain formula that I've utilized, and I've had untold number of people utilize, and everybody loves it. You have the foot cream, as you mentioned. By the way, you know your foot cream. There are some folks I know that that use it as a facial moisturizer. And they say it's like the most unbelievable thing they've ever had. And they say, why all these people are spending all this money, for, like a lot more money for stuff that isn't as well. Anyway, just so you know, so you get the foot cream issue. Then you got the wound product that you mentioned. That was what you had used or using in Ukraine, right? And also
right.
Around the country and for diabetics. And then now you also have a product, a new product, I believe, on the skin blemishes and sun, too much skin that's beat up by the sun. Correct?
That's right. And that's an extract of the eggplant. And what we've done is we take the eggplant and distill it down to a concentrated extract and then put that in that vanishing cream. So it works very well on the dry white patches of skin from sun damage and some of the other blemishes from too much sun. Now, that's a product that takes patience. It takes weeks to resolve some of those conditions. And if people are really interested in this approach, they should go online and do some research on the eggplant and some of those extracts. It's pretty telling, pretty informative. But again, that's a product. It's not original work on our part. We looked at things that other people have done and just refined it a little bit and repackaged it.
So that's an issue that comes up. People start a company, and they've told me, and people come to and say, hey, I want you to incorporate this product in your product line. So Gary, how do you do it? How should people, because once a business starts to build and there's some semblance of success, it draws other people to them about people wanting to be involved. And I get that. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. But how do you evaluate, like, for example, with this skin blemish cream, and how do you decide, okay, we're going to go here, or we're going to look at this product? Sorry, we're not going to look at that. How do you handle that?
Well, I look at the science, and then I've learned to trust my instincts also. But in the case of the eggplant, there was a lot of good science behind it, even though it wasn't FDA level type stuff. But it was quality work, and I knew that I was pretty convinced that I could make some improvements in the final product. And one of the things I added to the product was comfrey extract because these lesions need to heal.
Well, and that goes back to your farm experience too, right?
That's right. Like you mentioned, I started out on the business end of a dairy cow. And back quite a few years ago, if somebody was milking a herd of cows, that means he was observing that udder twice a day.
Uh-huh.
Now, as a physician, how often did you get to look at that patient twice a day?
Only in the hospital, right?
Right.
Never in the clinic, right? So you do morning rounds and evening rounds. But once that person had left the hospital, you would see them once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month, right? And that continuity of observation is so important. So important.
Exactly. And so you've got this dairy farmer out there looking at a sore or a lesion twice a day. Mm-hmm. And, contrary to popular belief, there are times that they think we're simple out here, but we're really not. And in your case, you probably didn't get to look at a skin lesion twice a day.
No.
So that cow's udder was an ideal place to observe how well a wound product would work. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And many times you can see a change in 12 hours, certainly within 24 hours. And the person with the vested interest, the person that owned that cow, was right there to observe the change. So it was an ideal test factory for us. And we learned to rely on it.
So as I mentioned, Gary, with your products and your product line, you are in the natural health product line, right? So many people say, well, how does Gary? He talked about how he deals with the feds and deals with the government, deals with the bureaucracy. How does Gary deal with the big boys in the pharmaceutical industry? And they can't be too happy with him and his natural products that sell at a fraction of a cost of what the big pharmaceuticals prescribe for you name the problem, right? So what kind of interactions do you have with the big boys in the pharmaceutical industry?
Well, for most of those years, they didn't pay much attention to us. And they were convinced that I was a little stupid, which is all right.
Yeah, right.
At one point, I approached several of the major players. Uh-huh. One particular company, I talked to one of the research scientists, and he said, if you tell us that this product stimulates healing, we'll be turned off. And I said, well, it does. And they got turned off. Now, conventional thinking does recognize today that you can stimulate healing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But we have a product you can't patent it. So the margins are going to be slimmer. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I've become convinced that big pharma is a cartel.
I agree. I agree.
And, a few years ago, there was a medical writer for a major magazine. He wrote about NSAIDs, non-steroidal
anti-inflammatories,
and how we needed an alternative. And I got excited because I knew he would want to hear about what we were doing. Mm-hmm. I wrote to him. I called him. I went to his office in New York City. Couldn't get in to see him. And finally I got him on the phone. And the guy was pretty sharp. He knew what he was doing. You would recognize the name of the magazine, very credible magazine. I finally got him on the phone. He said, told him what we had. He said, send me an email. I never heard from him again. There was no interest in taking a look at something that was non-traditional. And these magazines, if you look at the size of the ads from the prescription drug industry, I get it. I understand why they don't want to talk to me, who wants them to write about my product for nothing, even though it would be good information for the readers.
Right.
I don't want to throw stones.
No, that's not you.
But at this stage, I don't know that Big Pharma is interested that much in finding solutions. And it kind of goes back to my experience with my friend Andre in Ukraine. The payday for us was when we helped ease his pain and helped his recovery.
Right.
Doesn't really have a dollar value.
No.
But it was a big deal to Andre. And someday there's a payday monetarily, I believe. But at any rate, Andre's in a better position today than he would have been, I think.
So, Gary, educate our listeners on how they can follow your efforts, how they can network with you or at Steuart Labs, how they can learn more about your products and your story.
We have an online store, www.steuartlabs.com. And Steuart is spelled Steuartlabs. That's an odd spelling of Steuart. But it's the only one on the internet that I know of right now. Or they can call us at our 800 number. I don't call it myself. You probably have got it written down there. 844-210-9664.
There you go.
They can order online, pay with a credit card. And Dave, in this day and age, we still get calls from people that don't want to give a credit card number online or on the phone.
So what do you do?
We take their order, put it in a box, put an invoice with the box, ship it to them, and they send a check back. We do this every day, and they pay us. We hear so much bad news about America, but there are still a lot of highly honest people in this country, and we get paid, and we think we get more business because we trust people.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank you, Gary. It's when people hear your story, they get inspired because they've been constantly told, well, you won't succeed, that the odds are against you, that there are too many roadblocks, there are too many hurdles. And you don't sugarcoat it, Gary. You say, wait, hey, I made some mistakes. And yeah, there are traps you can fall into, but perseverance, dedication, sacrifice, excellent products, not being afraid to hear the word no, or no, we're not going to use your product, finding other avenues, staying with it, and making a positive difference for folks, not just of our country, not just of our society, but of folks around the world. And I thank you, Gary, and I thank you, because what you have done has helped, over the years, millions of people. From your products to your story, who people have you, if you will, utilized to inspire them to launch in their career, a new career. Because as I mentioned at the onset of this interview, many people are so disillusioned with what's happening in their workplace and what they are being demanded that they needs to happen for them to get back. They're now looking at alternatives. And I thank you for because a lot of folks will not come forward, Gary, and talk about, well, this is what I did that worked, this is what I didn't do that didn't work, and I thank you for doing that, because in the process you help so many people and inspire so many people, and you provide product for people that can help them and their underlying medical issues, and I thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And in closing, I would just tell people that probably the great majority of the time, the difference between winning and losing is quitting.
Good point.
So in this business, we decided we were going to play till we won. And I believe that's how life is. You play till you win.
Well, it's interesting. A friend of mine worked for Hershey Foods, and I didn't know this until he told me this, but Milton Hershey, the Hershey bar, that kind of thing, Hershey Kisses, yes. He filed bankruptcy 7 times before he succeeded. And that, again, is a testament to what you just said.
That's right.
I thank you, Gary Steuart, for everything you have done, are doing, and will do. Steuart, Steuart, StewartLabs.com. And as we sign off, my dad's favorite statement, dream big and dare to fail. Actually, Gary Steuart, that's what he's all about. He dreamed big, he dared to fail, and he succeeded in the process and helped millions of people. I thank you, folks, for your time. StewartLabs.com. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Gary.
Goodbye.